Welcome back for Chapter 12. We're going to cover tonight Emergencies and Medical. We're going to cover this in two parts. It's a long chapter, and part one covering your severe weather, equipment damage, fire, collision, man overboard, sinking, abandoned ship, and other stuff. Part two, we're going to cover the medical aspects, cover seasickness, diarrhea, sunburn, injury, sting, shock, hyperthermia, hypothermia, CPR, and the importance and the value of having a good first aid kit. So while planning and cruising, a mariner should consider the best time to depart and resume the cruise. Scheduled demands are usually the biggest cause of being exposed to severe weather, and the prudent mariner will leave port when the weather is fair, allowing sufficient time to reach the next port. Should drill the crew on proper tasks and actions if inclement weather should overtake you. And during a storm, be sure to know your position going in and monitor your position regularly. Maintain a radio watch during the event for changes in the weather and for communication with other vessels. This slide 5 identifies some of the things that can cause your day to go bad. Engine loss, of course, rudder loss, dismasting. Engine loss can create a dangerous situation and is particularly of concern to the single-engine powerboat. Even the best maintained boats might encounter a mechanical problem. Drop your anchor as soon as possible outside of the channel. This will provide you time to develop your options. However, this may not be possible in very deep water and coastal waters. A sea anchor or drogue may be a necessary piece of emergency equipment. Maintain sufficient spare parts to repair common malfunctions. To do so, you need the knowledge of engines and your specific type. The USPS Engine Maintenance course can provide the basics for all boaters. There are also commercial courses for the boat owner looking for more detailed maintenance information. Maintain an insurance policy with a towing capability. Boat US and Sea Tow are two nationally known services, and there are others. Call for assistance on Channel 16. The rudder is most apt to be lost from grounding or from too much stress on a spade rudder. More frequently, a boat loses steering because of broken cable. A loose cable coming off of the rudder quadrant or jamming of the steering gear. Every boat steered, whether by wheel or tiller, should have an emergency tiller aboard. Dismasting is usually a result of a shroud failure, fitting failure, or a 360-degree rollover. If the mast falls, act quickly. If at all possible, get whatever is left of the mast back on board and lash it as securely as possible. Regular maintenance is the best prevention. Check all standing rigging, turnbuckles, swedges, tangs, spreaders regularly to minimize the possibility of losing the mast. And if it's not capable and the weather is rough, you may have to have a pair of bolt cutters on board. You may have to cut away the mast and sacrifice it so that it doesn't punch a hole in the hull. Next thing we're going to talk about is fire, and have fire extinguishers on board. Make sure everyone knows how to use them. And of course, there's three types of fires, A, B, and C. And we're going to talk also about spontaneous combustion. Fire is one of the most frightening experiences any boater can have. The truth is that most fires are preventable. If a boat catches fire, the results can be devastating. The most important prevention for fires is careful inspection of the boat's electrical equipment, fuel lines, and fuel storage. Talking about Class A fires. Class A, be careful when adding to the contents of any trash basket. Something hot may ignite its contents. Combustible solids such as wood, paper, rubbish, and upholstery are Class A fires, and if small, are best extinguished by using water or dry chemical extinguishers. Class B fires, combustible or flammable liquids such as gasoline, kerosene, alcohol, diesel fuel, paint, and flammable gases are Class B fires. These fires are most dangerous and are best extinguished when dry chemical, CO2, or halon is used. Crew must also know the proper use of the galley stove. If the stove is not electric, everyone must know exactly how and where to turn off the fuel at the stove as well as at the tank. A galley fire can often be smothered with a wet blanket if one is available. Except for very small stoves, most stoves have a remote fuel tank. Immediately after dousing the fire, turn off the fuel at the stove and the fuel tank. If possible, turn off the fuel supply as soon as you discover the fire. Consider the layout of the boat's galley and create a plan for dealing with a fire in this area. Make certain at least one fire extinguisher is just outside the galley's entry and has the correct chemical for handling possible fires. Propane and other gas fires are the most dangerous kind. All boats should have either mechanical or electrical remote control valves that can be wired to simultaneously cut the fuel supply at both the stove and the tank. A fail-safe device such as a heat sensor, for example, ought to be fitted to the stove, and you should keep the area clean and in proper working condition at all times. Fire and explosion in the engine room can be avoided by proper maintenance and a strict adherence to safety refueling procedures. When refueling, turn off the master switch. In case an engine room fire, stop the flow of fuel immediately. With gasoline engines, shut off the ignition and then close the fuel valves. A self-actuating fire extinguisher system is probably the best insurance for saving the boat and the lives of those on board. Do not install such a system and then forget about it. Maintain the system regularly. Corroded valves will make the equipment useless. Another cause of engine room fires is overheating caused by an attempt to quiet noisy engines. Be extremely careful when adding sound deadening materials to ensure every step allows adequate ventilation and avoids overheating. Class C fires are electrical fires, or Class C, fires that start from overloading and short circuits, igniting other materials nearby. An electrical fire cannot be put out unless the source of electricity is shut off. Everyone should know the location of all master switches. To extinguish an electrical fire, first de-energize the circuit by opening main switches and or pulling shoreline plugs. Use dry chem, CO2, or halon as an extinguishing agent. Never use water or foam extinguishers, which may cause electrical shock or short circuits. On older boats, a large, readily accessible master switch should be installed if you do not already have one. Spontaneous combustion is another issue. Spontaneous combustion of oily materials can also cause fire on board. The combustion occurs when a certain type of oil, known as unsaturated oil, combines with oxygen in the air, liberating heat. If this happens in confined conditions, such as a bundle of waste rags that are rolled up, the heat cannot escape. This increased heat makes the reaction go faster until a temperature may be reached at which the blaze can start. So if you do happen to be using an agent like that or an oil like that, take the rags, lay them out until they dry, hang them over the lifelines or something, but don't fold them up. Try to keep them open until they dry. Collision. The main thing that's important, we always at all times want to do whatever necessary to avoid a collision. When cruising in shipping lanes, keep out of the way of the large ships. No matter what maritime laws dictate, a tanker cruising along at 20 knots always has the right of way. At 20 knots, a ship will cover 5 miles in 15 minutes, or 3/10 of a mile in 1 minute. So don't try to cross in front of one. Pass well astern and watch out for the large ship's wake. It can do some serious damage. Give the ship all the room you can and learn to recognize the placements of lights, which on a large vessel or towboat can be somewhat confusing. In restricted channels or towboat or a ship that has the right of way over a yacht at all times. Large ships are unable to stop or maneuver fast enough to avoid you even if they see you. Man overboard drills, something that we all talk about. We all say we should be sure we practice man overboard drills, but it really is critical. Man overboard drills allow thoughtful skippers to alter the boat's equipment and emergency plan as needed. Part of the boat's plan should provide for one crew member to watch the person overboard without participating in any other boat activity from the moment the victim is spotted in the water until the moment he again makes contact with the boat's cockpit. And that should be he or she. When practicing a man overboard drill, one must assess the skills of the crew and prepare accordingly. A powerboat underway will generate a noise level that will preclude other crew members from hearing a cry for help. For sailboats, the quick stop method is best. The instant the helmsman sees a person fall overboard or hears the cry, "Man overboard," he can tax the boat without releasing the jib sheet, and that will essentially the same as heaving to. The boat stops and could be close enough to throw a floatable or heaving line to the victim. Consider the life sling system advertised in many publications. A flexible horseshoe buoy is made fast to a floating line that in turn is made fast to the boat. In case of a man overboard, circle a person in the water, bringing the line and buoy to him so they can slip the buoy around his chest. Stop the engine, pull him to the boat, and lift him aboard at the swim platform ladder or with an anchor winch over the bow. Getting the person back on board is a challenge. Even if the person is lightweight, the wet clothes will add many pounds. So learn about the drill and use of hoists as learn about and drill on the use of hoists that may assist. So this quick stop method, again, you can go into irons. In this case, if you need to deploy the life sling, you wind up basically like you're going to pick up a water skier. You circle the victim, dragging the life sling behind you, and then come around up beside that person, downwind, heave to, and hopefully if you do it right, the life sling, they can grab onto the life sling, and you can pull them in. Notice in the lower right portion of this slide, they've got a line from a cleat to like a winch, a jib winch, that they can use to actually have the person stand on it and then help them come back on board. It's very difficult to get someone back on board amidships. If you've got a swim platform, sometimes you want to be careful that you don't have a dinghy on davits or something behind the boat that can give you problems getting your person back on board. Sinking. One of the most feared comments a skipper can issue is to abandon ship. When it becomes apparent that the volume of water entering the boat is greater than the pumping capacity, the skipper must begin abandon ship procedures, leaving the boat only if the captain is absolutely certain that the boat is going to sink. The cabin is full, the cockpit is full. Even then, some boats have been found floating months after the panicked crew abandoned ship. Sometimes these boats are found and the crews are never seen again. In a sinking emergency, strong leadership is imperative. You should have considered this situation in the planning stage with a specific crew in mind. It's important that all persons aboard know their responsibilities, know how to operate the emergency equipment on board. To work in unison, young or old, each must know what to do. The navigator should issue mayday calls on the radio using the digital selective calling DSC or on channel 16 periodically until the message is answered, the power fails, or the boat is evacuated. The call should include the schedule and frequency on which you will be monitoring the radio. Keep the boat's position up to date and readily available in the log or on the charts in the event of such an emergency. Most emergency situations will require help from the Coast Guard or some other agency. Wherever you are, you should have some idea of where that assistance will come from and whom to call. Be sure of the radio procedure for a mayday call and the exact information to be transmitted in such a call. And we covered that in Chapter 8. Life raft or for coastal and some inland boating is advisable. Despite your proximity to land and the recurrent boating traffic, awaiting rescue in a raft is preferable to floating in a life jacket for hours. A dinghy may substitute in some instances if inland. However, a life raft is designed for all types of weather, while a dinghy is not. Back in Chapter 3, Equipment and Systems, for more information regarding life rafts and man overboard equipment. Also, the old expression of stepping up into the life raft is very true. You should not abandon ship unless the ship is near sinking. If you have a dinghy, or a life raft, staying in the immediate area of your sinking and wearing life jackets will be your only option. Ideally, you would have had time to radio a distress call or activate your EPIRB. If not, you will have to float until help arrives. In cold water, you should assume the heat escape lessening posture help to conserve body heat. Where there is more than one person in the water, huddling with other people will also lessen the loss of body heat and improve morale. Do not expect the life raft's factory packed provisions to contain all the equipment you'll need. You must be aware of the exact contents of this survival kit. Because it is provisioned assuming a quick rescue, a commercial kit will provide a minimum of essentials. The crew trying to survive on these provisions may not be adequately prepared. Other emergencies, we're talking about grounding, foul propeller, loss of electrical power. Grounding many cruising areas, particularly in the Gulf of Mexico, Chesapeake Bay, and in the southeastern coastal sounds, have very shallow water. The bottom is soft, sand or mud. Running aground is common. Unless cruising at high speed, this situation is more of an annoyance than a danger. Other areas may have deep water, but outcrops of rock, coral heads, and other obstructions will cause serious damage if the vessel strikes them. Shoals are usually composed of hard sand. Sea action can cause extensive damage unless you can get off fairly soon. If you run aground hard and suddenly, first check the bilge for water. Be aware that many times the only help offered by the Coast Guard is to put you in touch with a commercial towboat that can pull the boat off the obstruction or sandbar. This is a case where a careful lookout, good piloting, and continually updated charts will save some money. Foul prop. Accidentally winding a line around the prop or shaft may be just minor, but in some instances can be a very serious problem. We had a situation like that in our BBI trip, but it's important to have the dinghy, someone in charge of the dinghy, if you come into an anchorage, to pull that dinghy tow line up short and reduce the possibility of it getting sucked into the prop if you have to put the engine in reverse quickly. Foul line can be expensive and may lead to grounding or engine failure. Never leave unsecured lines on the deck, and they may fall overboard and be drawn into the prop or shaft. A one-handed hacksaw is ideal for cutting nylon or Dacron and polypropylene line. Also, in certain areas of the coast, crab pots have proliferated. You must try to avoid the pots because the lines can wrap around your propeller shaft. Shut down the engine, drop sail, and set an anchor if practical before going over the side to inspect for damage. Should it be necessary for one of the crew to make an overboard repair, proper safety precautions are a priority. The crew members should be harnessed and hooked to a line that is secured to the boat. If a harness is not aboard, use a bowline on a bight, hitch attached to the individual. One person should tend the overboard crew members' lines at all times, even though another may be involved in the deck or in the repair. Loss of electrical power. Loss of electrical power can be a nightmare for those who depend on electronics for navigation. Without running lights and a compass light, night sailing can be a challenge. Provide for this emergency by having a designated starting battery and a separate deep cycle battery for the boat's electronics. So following are some additional slides that probably aren't covered in the homework perhaps, but let's go on. Losing power. 3 causes of engine power shutdowns are typically related to fuel, electrical, or your cooling systems. Loss of power due to an engine shutdowns are most often related to 3 typical sources. Fuel problems cause most engine trouble. If the engine stalls, the fuel may be dirty, including having water present, so replace the fuel filters. If the engine is still balky, there may be air in the fuel line, especially if you're dealing with a diesel engine. Remove the air following the instructions in the engine manual. There are exact procedures for trying to get the air out of a system, especially if you're dealing with the fuel injectors. Extra caution is needed when handling fuel. And of course, gasoline vapors are explosive and tend to accumulate in the lower part of the engine compartment or in the bilge. Electrical system problems may prevent the engine from starting or running smoothly. No engine will start with a dead battery. It is a good strategy to reserve one battery for starting only. Checking for clean connections on the spark coil and dry wiring to spark plugs helps. Cleaning or replacing spark plugs may also be needed on gasoline engines. Cooling system problems cause the engine temperature to rise dangerously high, and if the alarm goes off or the gauge reads above normal, immediately stop the engine. Running an overheated engine can cause extensive and expensive damage. First, inspect the raw water intake. The seacock may not be open, or weeds or jellyfish may have clogged the strainer. The next most likely cause is a pump impeller. This can only be checked by opening the pump casing. You should always carry a spare impeller and gasket set, as these can fail almost without warning. Many engine and pump manufacturers recommend replacement at least every 2 years. One signal of a damaged cooling system is water spitting out of the exhaust pipe instead of usually flow of water. There is a good brief troubleshooting guide in the Captain's Quick Guide. Broken rigging. And that's, again, there's a sailor's nightmare. Rigging on a sailboat holds the mast in position so the sails work as designed. A prudent sailor will carry spare cable lengths as an assortment of fittings to make needed temporary repairs while underway. Any rigging failure is cause for concern and will probably occur during heavy winds and seas, according to Murphy's Law. If a forestay cable breaks, it's likely the mast will not stay up if sails are attached. In this situation, lower the sails and use the halyards to assist in lifting the mast back into position. If the backstay breaks, luff up and get the sails down. Either stay can be repaired using spare wire and bulldog clamps, or a substitute may be rigged using a halyard. Someone may have to go aloft in a bosun's chair to clear or attach cable and fittings. If a mast breaks, clear away the mess before it holds the ship by pulling the cotter pin and clevis pins in the turnbuckles and releasing them from the chain plates. Wire stays usually cannot be easily cut. A dismasted boat rolls and pitches violently, so wear and hook on safety harnesses and crawl on deck. A new mast can be jury-rigged by lashing together the remains of mast and spars with line. Sails will need to be reefed and replaced with smaller sails. Only a few of the many possible jury-rig possibilities are indicated here. Necessity is the mother of invention, but having a reasonable stock of parts may help with good solution. Can you use a spinnaker pole as a gin pole to erect a mast section? Use whatever you have. On power boats and sailboats, a temporary rudder may be jury-rigged or improvised by dragging a paddle-like object, a tabletop or a floorboard, or other substantial item over the stern attached to a stiff pole. Side-to-side adjustments using lines as indicated here will swing the stern of a steering action. Because steering loads can be quite large, the system will break unless it is flexible. In this possible solution, the hinge at the stern must have plenty of give, or the jury-rigged rudder will snap, make it from a loose assembly of line. Twin prop power boats can be steered by balancing the use of the thrust from each engine. Single prop boats usually cannot be steered without a rudder. Many sailboats can be self-steered by trimming the sails and finding the right balance between the jib, pulling the bow down, and the mainsail or mizzen, perhaps pushing the bow up. A ketch or a yawl usually self-steers most effectively because the mizzen sail balances the jib. If the steering system breaks, stop the boat and inspect for damage that can be repaired. On cable steering systems, often the brake can be repaired with a short length of wire, bulldog clamps, shackles, or other fittings. On hydraulic steering systems, tubing damage due to mechanical or thermal causes can be repaired, if accessible, using a spare section of tubing and the appropriate fittings. Some older boats have an emergency tiller connection on top of the rudder post steering quadrant, often accessible through a deck plate. An emergency tiller can be attached or bolted to the quadrant. All temporary steering accommodations must be used cautiously. Power available from engines or sails must be managed carefully to safely keep from overloading the improvised system. Do not change forces rapidly. Check the bilge seacocks and hoses. If a hose is leaking, shut the seacock and tighten or replace the hose clamp or replace the hose if it's defective. If the seacock or its through hull fitting is missing or damaged, drive a tapered wooden plug into the hole with a hammer. Good planning would have the correctly sized tapered softwood plug attached to the fitting with a string so it be readily available. If the leak is not in a through hull, there probably is a hole in the bottom of the boat. Heel the boat so the hole is as far out of the water as possible. Cover it from the outside with a sail, cushion, or mattress, securing it in place with a line under the boat. By doing this outside, the water pressure will help hold it in place. You can do this by going in the water or tying a line to some material and pulling it under the boat from one side to the other until it's over the hole. If it's not possible to seal the hole from the outside or fill it from the inside with a bed sheet, blanket, cushion, or mattress, brace the cover against the pressure of the water trying to get it in. Remember to keep pumping and keep bailing. One additional technique is available to help keep the water level down if there is a large leak or to be managed. An emergency bilge pump can be improvised using the engine's raw water cooling system. Close the seacock for the water intake and remove the hose from the seacock and position it into the bilge and run the engine at a speed needed to get ahead of the leak. Sometimes it's very hard to take the hose off the seacock, so it might be necessary to cut the hose close to the end, but it will take a hacksaw to get through the wires embedded in the suction hose. Pre-planning how this might be done and having the correct tools on board should help minimize the time to put this technique into action. Debris in the bilge will block the inlet, so keeping the raw water intake hose clean is important here too. You'll have to adjust the engine speed to control the water level, but do not allow the pump impeller to run dry or you'll destroy it. All these things some seem kind of dramatic or drastic, but they're all tricks to add in your toolbox if you're trying to innovate a solution. And remember, this is for cruising. This is long distance cruising. You may be well away from a source of immediate help, and so it helps to consider all these different options and have a plan. With that, that ends the end of this section, and we'll look forward to any questions later.